The muscles of our body allow for movement. If you recall Chapter 4, we have 3 types of muscles that differ both in structure and in function. Skeletal muscle is named for its location as it is attached to the bones of our skeleton. It is striated or banded, consists of long cylindrical fibers, and it is voluntary, meaning that it is consciously controlled. Cardiac muscle is also named for where it is found in the walls of the heart. It is also striated with shorter branched fibers and one centrally located nucleus. It is under involuntary or unconscious control. Smooth muscle is found in our vessels and eyes, making up the walls of our hollow internal organs. It is not striated with short tapered fibers, and it is also under involuntary control. The most predominant muscle type is skeletal muscle, so we will concentrate on it in this chapter. Muscle tissue was connected to movement. Muscle cells, muscle organs, and the whole muscular system are also responsible for movement. The muscular system is what allows for all of the movements that we rely on throughout our lifetimes. Somewhat counterintuitive, the contractions of the muscular system also allow us to stand or sit erect, maintaining posture. The contractions of our thoracic muscles, our diaphragm, intercostal muscles, are what allow for the pressure changes that cause respiration to occur. The inhalation that brings in air, and the exhalation that sends air out of our lungs. As muscles contract, they generate a fair amount of heat. This heat is lost energy, but our body harnesses this byproduct to maintain temperature homeostasis. So maintaining that nice, healthy 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. All the movements we rely on for communication are also due to our muscles. Speaking, writing, our gestures and facial expressions, typing even, are all due to our muscles. Our smooth muscle is responsible for the contractions in our organs and vessels that allow for movement to occur through these organs, so propelling food from esophagus to stomach to intestines, regulating blood flow through the vessels. This is also responsible for holding substances within our organs, so holding food within the stomach to digest it, holding urine within the bladder. And finally, that cardiac muscle is responsible for the contraction of the heart, or heartbeat, that allows blood to flow through the heart and the entire cardiovascular system. Muscle is capable of movement because it has some unique properties. First and foremost, it is excitable. This means that it has the capability to respond to a stimulus. You can think of it as an off-on switch. It's capable of being turned on and also switched off. Neurons and nervous tissue are also excitable. So that's something that these two tissue types and organ systems share. Muscle responds to a stimulus by contracting. Contractility is the ability to shorten forcefully. When muscle contracts and shortens, it pulls on the structures it's attached to, namely the bones of the skeletal system. It's attached to these via tendons. So this contraction allows the skeletal system and thus the whole body to move. Muscle is also extendable, meaning that it has the ability to contract when it's stretched beyond its resting length. And finally, muscle tissue is elastic. It exhibits elasticity or stretch, the ability to bounce back or recoil after it has been stretched out beyond its resting length. This is a property we've talked about before because we have elastic fibers in connective tissue that lend elasticity to certain connective tissues. So this is a more widespread function. Now, skeletal muscle is very prevalent throughout the body. It makes up around 40% of our body weight, though of course it varies depending on gender, activity level and fitness, age. Our muscle mass goes down pretty significantly as we age, particularly as we hit 60, 70, 80 years old. As we already talked about, this muscle is named for its location. It's attached mostly to the bones of the skeleton. This isn't always the case. Some are attached to the skin or to connective tissue structures. The cell shape of a skeletal muscle cell is quite unique. When we talk about cells in chapter 3, we kind of look at, something like this, right? A blobby, maybe circular or ovoid cell, the big nucleus roughly in the middle. However, skeletal muscle cells look very different. And this unique structure contributes to its function. Skeletal muscle cells, first off, are cylindrical and very long. They are formed when multiple immature myoblast cells fuse together early on in development. Each of these myoblasts brings with it its own nucleus. So it's long and it has many nuclei. And those nuclei are pressed up right below the cell membrane at the periphery or edge of the cell. Most of the interior of the cell is composed of long thread-like protein fibers. And these fibers are arranged in a regular pattern, which gives the skeletal muscle a banded appearance. So it is said to be striated. While all muscle cells are long and lean, shall we say, the skeletal muscle cells are the longest in that they travel the length of whatever muscle organ they're a part of. Some of our muscles are really big, such as the muscles of the thigh, the rectus femoris, the sartorius is almost 2 feet in length, and the muscle fibers found making it up are going to stretch the entire length of these muscles. Not all are long. We have some very small skeletal muscles too, but they do comprise the longest of our muscle cells. Muscles, named muscles, are complete organs. So while the functional tissue is skeletal muscle tissue, there are other tissues found here like connective tissue, or blood vessels, blood, connective tissue wrapping up the muscle found within, and then nerves are plentiful running throughout our muscle organs. This is your image from the book where we see a portion of several muscle fibers or cells. Cylindrical, they're all running in the same direction. We have multiple nuclei that are way at the edge of the cell. And these stripes here are those alternating light and dark striations. When we look at the whole muscle organ, we'll find that the whole exterior or outside is covered by fibrous connective tissue called the epimysium. So this is going to surround the whole deal, uniting the muscle organ to other functionally related muscles, continuous with the fascia that connects the muscle to the skin. When we cut into that muscle, we'll see that muscle cells are bundled together in groups. Each of these is a muscle fascicle. So a fascicle equals a bundle of fibers. This is the grain of meat. So if you've ever heard you cut against the grain of a steak, this is the grain that's being referred to. It's macroscopic. So if you look at chicken or at steak, you're able to see these bundles arranged in the meat. And our muscles are arranged in a similar fashion. Each fascicle is wrapped up with more connective tissue called the perimysium, which separates a fascicle from its neighboring fascicles, contains nerves and blood vessels for the muscle cells. Then if we look even further down, maybe break out the microscopes and look at each muscle cell, we'll see that each is individually wrapped in a thin areolar connective tissue sheath called the endomysium. So epi, peri, endo, epi meant above, so this is the uppermost or topmost mysium. Endo for within, this is the innermost mysium. And then the peri means around, so you can maybe think of this as going around each fascicle. Kind of makes a sandwich, E-P-E, right? If you want to arrange the letters of the words. Now, when we peel back that very thin, delicate endomysium, we'll find the muscle cell. The muscle cell is often referred to as a muscle fiber because it is fibrous, long and skinny like a thread. So this is just due to that unique shape and structure of the muscle cell. Generally speaking, when compared to other cells, this is a large, or maybe more accurately long cell, with again many nuclei, usually several hundred nuclei pressed up underneath the cell membrane. The number of muscle fibers stays about the same after we're born. Muscles hypertrophy or grow bigger as a function of growth in fiber size, not fiber number. So here we have our bone with the periosteum surrounding it. Then we have that connective tissue, dense regular connective tissue that is continuous with the periosteum and then continuous also with the epimysium that surrounds this muscle. When we cut into the muscle, we see that muscle cells or muscle fibers are arranged in bundles. So each of these is a fascicle. The fascicles are separated out by the perimysium. So we see this smaller circle of purple surrounding each fascicle. That would be our perimysium. Then when we look closely at each fascicle, we see that each is composed of many muscle fibers. And it's not really pictured here, right? But each of these muscle fibers would then be surrounded by a thin endomysium. So it's bundles of bundles, shall we say, where we have the muscle organ, and we have the fascicle, and we have our muscle fiber, right? So muscle organ is surrounded by the epimysium. Don't worry, I'll abbreviate. The fascicle is surrounded by the perimysium. And then each muscle fiber is in turn individually wrapped in an endomysium. So muscle organ is really a bundle of bundles or fascicles. And then a fascicle is a bundle of muscle cells. And we'll see, this is a bit of a preview, but I'll do it here so we can include it in this summary. We'll see here in a second that each muscle cell or fiber is actually really a bundle of myofibrils, which is in turn a bundle of thin protein threads called myofilaments. And then we'll see that each myofilament is composed, myofilaments rather, come in two flavors. We've got actin, or actually, so we have the thin myofilament, mostly composed of actin, a protein called actin, but also another protein called troponin, and the third called tropomyosin. And then there's also a thick, which is composed of just one type of protein called myosin. So this is, I'm including this here just to say that this bundles of bundles theme continues even in the microscopic realm, where we'll look inside each muscle cell or muscle fiber, and we'll see it's composed of these myofibrils. And then myofibrils are literally bundles of thin myofilaments. And that myofilament could either be a thin myofilament or a thick myofilament. And if we're thin, it's actually really an association, another bundle, you could say, of three: actin, troponin, and tropomyosin. So as we go from organ to myofilament, we're going from big to small. Right? And we can see some of those components here. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to look in the microscope and see what an individual muscle cell or fiber looks like. Because the function of a muscle fiber is unique, its structures are unique too, and many have special names. The sarcoplasm of a muscle fiber is simply its cytoplasm. Every cell has cytoplasm, right? So the muscle fiber is no different. It has a special name because it has a special composition. It has a lot of mitochondria in it. Thinking back to chapter 3, mitochondria produce ATP energy for us. They are the powerhouses of the cell. The muscle fiber uses lots of energy to contract, so we need lots of mitochondria to produce that ATP energy for it. The sarcoplasm also has a high concentration of a protein called myoglobin. Might remind you of another protein that's more familiar, hemoglobin. These are both globin proteins, and they both bind to oxygen. Hemoglobin in our red blood cells, myoglobin in our muscle cells. So the mitochondria can use that oxygen for ATP synthesis. We'll see myo pop up. Myo or mezi indicates muscle. Another common prefix here is sarco for flesh, also used in a lot of muscle terms. Finally, that sarcoplasm also has a high concentration of glycogen, which kind of looks like glucose maybe. This is a storage form of glucose, so it's essentially sugar, right? Sugar or glucose for the mitochondria. So now the mitochondria here have plenty of sugar and oxygen to produce ATP with. Every cell has cytoplasm. Every cell has a cell membrane. So again, muscle fiber is no different, but again has a special name, which is the sarcolemma. Sarcolemma equals cell membrane. Why does it have a special name? It has special features called T-tubules or transverse tubules that regularly appear down the length of the cell. No other cell has T-tubules. The T-tubules or transverse tubules are inward folds or invaginations of the sarcolemma, where it folds in deep in towards the core of the muscle fiber, the center of the muscle fiber. Each T-tubule is closely associated with the sarcoplasmic reticulum in a structure called the triad. Well, what's the sarcoplasmic reticulum? Geez. Sounds like endoplasmic reticulum, right? It's actually the smooth endoplasmic reticulum of the muscle cell, which again has a special name because it is special. It looks special, has a special role to play. There's going to be many of these bulbous enlarged ends that lie close to the T-tubules called terminal cisternae. It's another complicated term. Wherever you see terminal, this word pops up a lot in anatomy and biology. This means end. So it's the end of something. Here it's the end of an element of the sarcoplasmic reticulum. There's two of these. Cisternae is a cistern, water container. So think of it maybe as a water jug. So that kind of shape. Two of these that are associated with each T-tubule. So again, it's kind of like a sandwich with terminal cistern on one side. Then we'll have that T-tubule fold. And then we'll have another terminal cistern on the other side. So the sarcolemma is very closely associated with the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And anything that happens on the sarcolemma is very easily transmitted to the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which is a little hint for later on. The majority of the sarcolemma inside of the muscle cell is packed full of myofibrils. Fibril, think bundle. Maybe there's a B in there. It's a bundle of thread-like proteins, are myofilaments. So it's like a thread that you sew with, where the thread is like the myofibril, and then when you look closely at it, maybe when you try and get it through the eye of a needle and fail, it starts to fray, you can really notice that it's made up of much thinner threads that are woven together. So the sewing thread is like the myofibril, and then those individual thinner threads are like the myofilaments. There's two types of myofilament, thin and thick. That's just because one is thinner and one is thicker, literally. The thin filament is made up mostly of the protein actin, though as we were talking about, there's troponin and tropomyosin proteins on there too. And then the thick filament is made up only of the protein myosin. There's other proteins that hold these myofilaments and fibrils together, but we don't get into that here. The myofilaments are arranged in a repeating pattern that makes the sarcomere. And it's this sarcomere that is the functional and structural unit of skeletal muscle, as it is the smallest part of it, the smallest component that's capable of contraction or shortening. So it's a bunch of sarcomeres contracting that allows the whole muscle organ to contract and allows our whole body to move. It's a function of what's happening here at a microscopic level. Extending that last diagram, so looking at our bundles of bundles again, here we have our muscle fibers composing the vesicle, and we're looking at just one of those, right? You can see the sarcolemma, and then you can't see it really, but it will be full of the sarcoplasm, cytoplasm, which has a lot of those mitochondria, plus myoglobin and glycogen in it. And that sarcolemma is folded into our T-tubules here, or transverse tubules that go down deep into the center of the muscle fiber. And each T-tubule is going to be right next to sarcoplasmic reticulum. You can see here they touch, so they are very closely associated together. So those structures exist in the muscle cell, but most of it, you can see here, almost all of it is full of myofibrils. All of these are myofibrils, or bundles of myofilament fibers. Here we're taking out just one myofibril. We can see that there's lots of these thin filaments or actin myofilaments and thick myosin myofilaments making up each myofibril. Right? So lots of myofibrils in one muscle cell or fiber, and then lots of muscle cells in a fascicle, and then lots of fascicles bundled together to give us our muscle organ.